within 20 years. And it's really, really important. And so if you want to ask what's the value of Dana McKenzie's office and the $1 million broadband grant that was given to RS Fiber, without that broadband grant, we would not have the opportunity to construct a $100 million medical school in Minnesota that would train 150 physicians a year, with over half of them going to the rural areas, and with $250 million economic impact on the state. It's absolutely huge, and it forces you to think differently about economic development and differently about your market. I always come to these sessions looking for one good idea. And Jonathan, I have to thank you for your quote. I had forgotten about that quote, but it reminded me about something that we've used in Gaylord for the last 10 years. A quote by Margaret Mead that says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And I can say that in working with the RS Fiber board and the people affiliated with that project, Dan Peccary and Hiawatha Broadband, Shannon, Dana's office, and other people, that if those people would not have persistently proceeded forward against all odds, this would never have happened. I sometimes told the board that you should come to the board meeting with a bucket of Tums, because this is forcing you to do things differently than you've ever done before. And what was interesting in the process is that because they had a start back in 2010, they ended up having a challenge of public perception as to the model was changing, the finances were changing. Everybody was so enamored with the technology that there was not enough focus early on the financial model that made the deal work. And it was with the assistance of Hiawatha Broadband and Dan and other people that we went to the two-pronged model. But even that, we ran into difficulties. And when I think about, this, I think about the optimist and the pessimist who were arguing over the glass of water, whether it was half empty or half full. And while they were arguing, the opportunist came in and drank the glass of water. And I really think that Jonathan's message today was that for rural America, we absolutely must be an opportunist, and we need to go in and drink the water. And we need to take the chance, and we need to take risks, and we need to live outside the box from where we've done in the past. And what we did with RS Fiber was, to my knowledge, a very unique public-private partnership where the taxpayers issued GO bonds that were full recourse back to the municipality, had no claims on the assets or the cash flow of RS Fiber Cooperative, but they were injected as a subordinated and unsecured loan. And that enabled us to put together the rest of the financing for the project. And what made sense is the taxpayers were also the customers and were also the members of the cooperative. That's the unique aspect about cooperatives in rural America, and something that we really need to stand up and pursue very aggressively in the next decade, or otherwise the 1.5 million people that live in Minnesota's 68 rural counties might as well just move to the Twin Cities, because we're not going to have broadband, we're not going to have health care. So I'd like to give you a couple of key things that we've learned over the last 3 years since I've been involved with the project. First of all, with respect to sources of financing, you've heard of urban legends. There are lots of rural legends out there. A lender and investor will be all too willing to talk to you about a fiber project that failed someplace around the country, and will not even look at the numbers or give credence to the structure that you have to a transaction that is different from something that failed in the past. So you need to overcome those rural legends. Second, there's an issue relative to construction and permanent financing. I have to commend Cliff Bolstead. He and I have been brainstorming over the last few months about different ways that we could use CoBank's area to help finance this. Unfortunately, because we're an RS Fiber cooperative and not an electric utility, we had to go to CoBank's telecommunications area. And it's taken us 90 days just to get a meeting with those people. And we're going to meet with them on August 3rd, and I'm cautiously optimistic that I'll be able to make some lemonade with CoBank's telecommunications people But I believe that with what Cliff and I talked about this morning, we may have come up with a way for us to collaboratively work together and follow Jonathan's advice about having cooperatives work together for a one solution, which is broadband border-to-border throughout the state of Minnesota. The other thing I found is that there's too much of a focus on the technology and all the things that you could do with it. And quite frankly, I've seen enough business plans over 35 years that everybody gets enamored with the technology and they forget about the marketing and the sales and the operations and the economics of how you finance and how an investor gets a return on this. And it doesn't make any sense for a bank to complain about credit unions because they're not going to go away. A bank needs to compete with credit unions. It doesn't make any sense to complain about AT&T or CenturyLink or Frontier. You have to compete with them. You have to get out of bed in the morning and compete. And so what we had to do with the board was people who were very passionate about the technology and what it could do for them, we had to get them to think about the finances and how it pays back the dollars that are invested in the project. The next thing we had to do was we needed to align the shareholder interests with the customer interest, with the taxpayer interest, with the community interest. And I have to say that RS Fiber's board had, 150 meetings in 2 counties, and actually portions of 4 counties, in 12 cities, in 21 townships. And by the end of the time, 10 out of the 12 cities and 17 out of the 21 townships decided to be part of RS Fiber Cooperative. And it was a lot of sweat equity of time and meetings in the evenings and the weekends between neighbors door to door to talk about it. You can't just expect this stuff to happen. It's like a successful church. A successful church doesn't have people in the pews waiting to be served. A successful church has people who get out of the pews and serve others. And that's, I think, a message that needs to go to everybody as you're working together for these fiber projects. Another thing is that there are sources of funding that's out there that's not yet available. I was talking to Dana a little bit earlier, and she's aware of this, and we're going to work. There's a program that's available for economic development funding in the state of Minnesota that would not cost the taxpayers of Minnesota a single dollar. It's called a HUD Section 108 loan. It's 20% of the Community Development Block Grant Program. It's $85 million a year. What if we had $85 million a year of federal money that could fund viable rural broadband projects in the state? It's a huge opportunity. It's something that I'm devoted to working with Dana and the governor's office, because it's not just a fiber project, but it's the medical school and its healthcare facilities throughout the state, and also the other areas of rural infrastructure in the state. And finally, when I was talking with Cliff about the financing, one of the things that we believe that could happen, and we kind of penciled the numbers in a little bit, but if we had RS Fiber Cooperative already working with Jaguar Communications and Hiawatha Broadband on the basic connection between the different markets, and RS Fiber has 2 fiber rings in our area, if we had electric utilities that each invested and became, let's say, a 10% shareholder in RS Fiber Cooperative, then what we could do is we could leverage 10 to 1 through CoBank, the financing for the infrastructure. We could provide services to 10 counties, almost 250,000 people, and we could do that with money that would pay back the loans and provide a return to the electric cooperatives. 35 years ago, when I started out in banking, my grandfather was over 80 years old, and he was bald, and I was first working with computers. And I would do an analysis for him, and he says, well, what does your computer tell you? And so I'd give him like 10 pages of spreadsheets. And then he would say, well, here's the way I look at it. And he would take out an envelope from his wastebasket, and I think about this, this, and this. He says, well, this is the number I came up with. And I looked at him, and damn if he wasn't about $2 away from what I had done with my fancy computer. So this is my grandfather today. After talking with Cliff, we kind of went through the numbers. We can make these things work, but the way it works is you use the existing head end of companies that are out there today, not just Hiawatha Broadband, but the other providers in Minnesota. You use the state broadband grants, you use the access to federal funding, you get the rural electric co-ops to all come together. You don't have to do it all yourself. You own the assets, okay? You own the assets just like an investor owns the assets of a Walgreens drugstore, and Walgreens runs the business because that's all they do and they do it well. That's the approach that we need to take. I'm happy to work with the cooperators to do that. I want to spend a lot of time with Jonathan talking about this because we absolutely have to do the investment in rural broadband in this state, and we need to do it in the next 10 years to provide for the teleeducation and the telemedicine, or we are going to be bankrupt in rural Minnesota within a decade. Thank you.